Hello everyone, this is Brian, and this is most definitely not my Reusable Space Program series. This is 1.1, 64-bit on Windows, no less. Now, what I'm trying to do here, when I go to 1.1, I'm really considering using the fewest mods possible. So, because there are no mods available right now for 1.1, really, there's only a handful, I decided to give this a try using stock parts. So this is essentially a replica of the launcher I've been using lately, the one that leaves its second stage fuel tank up in orbit and the engine returns and all that, and the first stage returns. And I wanted to see if I could do the same thing with 3.75 meter stock parts. Now, I only have about 5 mods installed right now. Scatterer is one. The SpaceX landing legs is another one. And then the only other thing I did on this rocket that's non-standard is, whoa! Yes, this is the first time I flew it, so I'm very unfamiliar with it, and it's not balanced very well. Where was I? Oh, and I sized up the 2.5 meter docking, the senior docking port, to 3.75 meters, the 2.5 to 3.75. So, just mostly for looks, you could get away with 2.5, but yeah, it just looks kind of crappy, especially since it's sitting on a fuel tank with a texture on top that's not supposed to be exposed. So anyway, here we are. I'm really surprised at how capable these stock parts are these days. I'm using the stock fairings and the stock engine and everything, and it's looking pretty good. I definitely still dislike the stock textures, but maybe I'll get over that in the interest of having an install that's easily managed. I do have real plumes installed, which is why the plume's getting like that. So let's see how this goes. Okay, that went well enough. Whoa, what's going on here? All right, well, we'll just make this a test of the first stage and see if I can get it back. I forgot to check to make sure the apoapsis was going to be above, at least 40 kilometers. So this one, I believe the trajectory is just too low. There's too much aerodynamic forces on this from the airstream, and I can't get this thing to turn around. So consider this one a failure. Now, I must say that I'm not too surprised that this is a failure because without any tools, it's pretty hard to calculate the total delta V. So this is very much a just kind of build this thing by feel and see what happens. I'm actually kind of surprised it was this successful. Maybe if I add just one more small fuel tank to it, I can get it working correctly. So I figure if I put a small fuel tank on the bottom, hey, I said small tank. What are you doing with that big tank? Yeah, get the small one on there. Yeah, bottom. I said bottom. Put it on the bottom. I want it on the bottom so that the weight of fuel is concentrated way down by the engine. That way, when the payload is released, whatever aerodynamic forces are left should flip this thing around quickly all by itself. All right, off to the launch pad for launch number 2. Uh-oh. Yes. Yes. It's as wobbly as a noodle. Completely uncontrollable. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Remember, this is not sped up. This is 24 frames per second. This is exactly what I thought. Same thing. So I'll just take this as an opportunity to try out the first stage landing system. This is a little bit different than I had before, because I cannot put landing gear on the bottom of this engine. The mesh just does not allow it. So I had to come up with something else. And I came up with something that's kind of novel and kind of cool. So let's see how this works. So skipping ahead here, up at its apoapsis at high altitude, going to get rid of this payload. Now above that engine, of course, is a second stage tank that would end up being left in orbit at the space station to become more space station. And now you can kind of see what I'm aiming at here. Got a nice little kind of service module in here. Hit all that, dumpy looking fuel tanks that I hate so much. Those 2.5 meter Rockamax fuel tanks. Now, okay, unload that, and we'll give this thing a ride down. It's going to go down on its heat shield nose first, and then we'll dump that heat shield and deploy the legs. And the parachutes are on the back. Now on the way back down without the trajectories mod, I completely missed my landing zone here, despite my best efforts. But you can see how the system works anyway. Deploy the chutes. And once these chutes deploy completely, then that heat shield just be hanging from everything else, and I can drop that. And then put the landing gear down. Now, even though this is now pretty much a waste of my time because I'm touching down on water, there is one piece of important information I can get from this, which is the speed at touchdown under those parachutes. And it touches down at about 16 meters per second, which is most likely too much for those landing legs, so I do need to do something there to fix that. So now here we are. I moved that small fuel tank on the first stage up to the top of the stack, and it looks like all the wobbling problems have gone away. There will always be some, because I'm having a really hard time connecting a strut to the docking node that I'm using to connect the second stage fuel tank to the second stage engine module. I'll have to, I don't know, figure something out around that. Now this version flew pretty nicely up to its staging limit. I think I now have the right amount of delta V for this second stage and 25-ton payload, but yeah, can't stage. All right, back to the drawing board. On my next attempt, I was feeling a little bit of frustration, so I decided, well, I'll just throttle up to second stage and see what happens. Uh-oh. And seeing all that stuff attached to the engine like that, that's an important clue. Clearly the subassembly is not attached to the second stage using the correct node. So I went back and I kind of rebuilt the subassembly and made sure that it was using the node on the decoupler. I actually stuck a probe core on a cubic octagonal strut just below the node on the decoupler, so it must have been attached to the probe core rather than the decoupler. And finally, success. Up at the right staging point, time to quick save, because now I can test two separate things. Test whether that first stage can make it back, and I need to test whether that second stage has enough delta V to put that payload up at a 100-kilometer orbit and return. Now with this system, the solar panels are fixed and they are hidden beneath those fairings, so I'm going to drop those off before I get into a circularized orbit so they fall back down and burn up. And success, 100-kilometer orbit, yay. Now let's see if we can get it back down again. I know it's probably impossible for you to see this, but I released the payload on the far side of the planet at nighttime, then immediately turned around the second stage, burned a little bit to lower its periapsis back down to about 72 kilometers. I knew that would be close to the point where I would do my deorbit burn back in the daylight. There we go. I forgot to release the second stage fuel tank though, but that's okay because I do want to return the engine module with empty tanks. Now remember, I don't have the trajectories mod installed. I just completely winged this deorbit burn. I did about 400 meters per second. Again, actually about 430. And I did it where I usually do it, which is kind of right over the coast of that desert continent there. However, remember, this reentry vehicle has a different weight, has a different aerodynamic characteristics. So the chances of this being the correct burn are just completely random. I have no clue where this thing is going to come down. And during this flight series where I remembered that I needed to release that second stage fuel tank before I did my deorbiting, but whatever, it's all good. This is just for fun. Now I gotta say, I'm loving my frame rates right now. It saves me so much time in editing, makes it so much more playable. Scatterer mod looks awesome. We'll see what happens when the clouds come out, cloud mod comes out. Who knows, maybe I'll just leave it like this. And as it happens, I'm coming down a little bit shy, but that's okay. It's actually pretty accurate for never having tried to deorbit this module before. Now you get to see the whole thing in action. Now, I really don't like how the stock parachutes clip. So, remember it came down at 16 meters per second. I probably should have added 2 more parachutes. But on this one, I decided to do something a little bit different and just add some Sepratron rockets to kind of do a retro burn. And I was concerned that, that they only fire for a few seconds. So I was thinking like, okay, I got to fire them really close to the ground. I'm going to do it right before I hit. But I forgot that they will take time to decelerate this landing vehicle, so it didn't really work out. But what about that first stage? We got to test that too. Need to figure out this thing has more or less the right delta V to return, number one. Number two, I need to know how these landing legs perform. I've never used these landing legs from this particular mod before. Now, seeing my altitude, I know this is a little bit marginal. I would like to be a little bit higher to do this. I have to very aggressively turn this thing around, get it headed back towards the KSC, and then flip it over again in a short amount of time. And again, with no trajectories mod, I'm completely eyeballing that. Aiming for the ocean, thinking that the planet's going to spin underneath me, and aerodynamics will actually make that a little bit closer to where I am right now. But as it turns out, I completely overshoot. And I'm low enough that I don't have time to turn the vehicle around again, so this thing is coming in nose first, which is definitely a concern and not how I want this to work. It is possible that when I deploy the parachutes, the rapid spinning of this launcher around will tear it apart. Now, in addition to the main parachutes, I did add a couple of drogue parachutes to it. There's 4 of them that can be deployed at a faster speed without getting ripped apart. So I deploy those first, and then when it slows down even more, deploy the main chutes. And I'm coming down with no fuel and at about 20 meters per second. Pretty easy to guess what's going to happen there. But that was only my first try. Let's see if I can do this again, try and save a little bit of fuel for touchdown, and see if I really need to modify this rocket or not. So back to my quick save to try again. And by just simply doing everything a little bit quicker and a little bit of a shorter burn, I am able to have time here to flip it over and come down properly. Deploy the parachutes at a higher altitude. I do have a tiny bit of fuel for landing. Let's see how this goes. It's looking pretty good. Came down just a little bit too hard, I think. Maybe aided by the fact that I ran out of fuel about a half a second before touchdown. Let's try again. Now in this one I'm coming down on a little more of a slope, so I'm really expecting this to tip over, but it doesn't. Oh my gosh, look at that. It's kind of sliding around a little bit though, but you know, it's might be a good thing. The old landing legs, you couldn't wiggle them around like this, so it looks like these are a little bit stronger. I don't like them sliding around. I'm not sure what that's about. I actually hit the brakes here at the end to see if those are made from wheels, see if that would stop it, but it turns out they're not. So I do a little celebratory crashing of the rocket. This also gives me a feeling for how much fuel I had left when I touched down, and you can see where the more efficient techniques, as you get used to things, definitely gives you a decent amount of leftover fuel sometimes. But what what happens if I use those landing gear on very flat ground. So let's try it like this, taking off with almost empty fuel tanks. I just want to get it up here a little bit and have enough altitude here where I can try a landing on this flat ground right around the KSC. All right, coming down nice. Oh, look at that, a bounce. Cool. What am I going to do? Got some fuel left. I know. Let's destroy the VAB. Oh, I missed. Well, perhaps you will see this vehicle in the near future in my reusable series. That's it for now. As always, fly with confidence.